Well, believe it or not, this position is not a draw. This is actually a win for white after black's last move g5, which was a blunder. Now, you're going to learn two things in this video. Number one, you're going to learn the most important chess principle in king and pawn endings. Okay, if you don't know this, you're going to continue to lose these kind of endings and not win ones that you should win. But if you understand this, it's going to make a huge difference. So that's the first thing you're going to learn. And the second thing you're going to learn is king and pawn endings are really, really tricky. And you're going to see a clear example of that as we go through this position. Okay, this was taken from a real game, just played the other day. I was playing as white. My opponent was playing as black. And when you first look at this, it might be hard to believe that it's not a draw, right? Because the pawns are exactly equal. The kings are both in the center. And if anything, you might say black maybe has a slight advantage because of look at black's king's placement, right? It's 3 squares away from the starting rank where mine's only 2. Black's king is further up the board, which normally, a lot of the times in these type of endings, is a good thing. So why would I say this is winning for white? Well, we're going to talk about it, and I am going to give you a chance to pause. If you would like to pause, there's only one winning move in this position. What do you think the winning move is? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move is b4. And b4, I did play this in the game, is such a great move because it shuts down black's king. So if you look carefully, look at where the king can go to. You can't go there because your own pawn is there. The king actually is forced to go backwards unless black is willing to make a pawn move. But can you make any pawn moves? Well, if you go here, you're just losing a pawn. If you go here, you're just losing a pawn. And if you go here, you're just losing a pawn. So black's king is forced to go backwards, which allows me to advance my king. Okay, we're going to keep talking about this position from there. But I want to go ahead and actually just show you the game. How did we end up in this position? Wild opening. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to show you. It was a Ponziani, and black played this little gambit line where they give up the pawn so that they can jump the knight in and unleash the bishop. Everybody's been playing this against me lately. I don't know why. But I do have to, save the queen because it's attacked. So usually I just go back, they trade, and then you can kind of just develop their pieces quickly. I'm up a pawn, but black does have some nice center control and a little bit of lead in development. It's pretty equal. Okay, so I trade that. I castled. I knew that my opponent wanted to play b5 and try to attack me over here. So I was setting up to play c5. So b5, c5, gain some space, attack the bishop. So that's why I played queen to e3. However, I totally missed black's follow-up here. After I play c5, I totally missed it. He could just play f4. And my queen is running out of squares. I can't move my queen and defend the pawn. And so I said, okay, well, what can I do? Let me get a little bit tricky. And I played knight to e4, thinking I lose a queen, I get a queen. I lose a knight, but I get a bishop. It's kind of a big trade. Still not great for me because at the end of everything, this pawn is on f2 and it's defended by a rook, and that's kind of annoying. Anyway, game goes on, brings the rook over. We trade these guys. And then here, my opponent offers another trade, which I took. And then I decided, you know what, let me go ahead and hunt this pawn down. And we end up, after all of those crazy things, we end up with this position right here. Totally equal. And by the way, Stockfish says this position is a draw, okay? So where exactly did black go wrong? Well, he brings his king up. Nothing wrong with that. Brought my king up. Brings his king up. I played g4, and in my mind, I'm thinking, let me just advance my pawns as much as I can, maybe gain some space, get both of these guys up here, start pushing something. So black's response seemed very natural to me, g5, like, hey, I'll just stop the pawns from moving forward. It's actually a huge blunder, and the reason is because he runs out of moves and doesn't give his king any options. Okay, so back to the game. When I played b4, black's problem is that he has no moves. The only piece that black can move now is his king, right? The pawns can't move. Otherwise, they just get captured. But I have these pawns, which I can use for what are called waiting moves if I need to. A waiting move in chess is like, well, I like my position. I really want to make you move because you're going to mess it up somehow, like Zugzwang. Let me just wait. Well, you can use a pawn to do that in a situation like this. Now, we're going to come back to that in just a second. So this is what I mentioned. He doesn't have any moves. He has to go backwards. Okay, when he goes backwards, I come up. And now my king is 3 spaces off of the first, and black's king has been pushed back, which is good for me, right? Okay, so let's keep going. What does my opponent do? Well, he doesn't really have a lot of options. He moves the king over. All right, great. So now, what should I do in this position? All right, well, if you had a chance to look at that, I decided that I needed to trade these pawns off. And the reason that I needed to do that is because if I play a move like h3, And let's say he goes over and he lets me invade and I can start coming in and hunting down these pawns. What is the problem with that? What is the problem with that plan? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, hopefully you said, well, I'm going over here and doing this. Black's going to take my pawn and get a queen. And the question is, who's going to win? Right? Who's going to win that race? And the answer is black. Watch this, because I have to take 2 pawns before I can start pushing. He only has to take 1, right? So watch what happens here. Takes. Queen, and I lose the game. Okay? So you have to be really, really careful, right? So I decided, in this moment, I shouldn't do that. I needed to go ahead and trade these pawns so that black doesn't have that as a plan where he can capture mine and push his pawn. So we traded this off. He moves here. In chess, at the end of the game, when the kings are directly opposed, it's called opposition. Very important concept because one king is totally keeping the other king from invading. Okay? Now, what do you think I played and why? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, the move I played was h3. And remember I said earlier, using these pawns as waiting moves. That's what I did here. And this is the idea. Okay, this is what's so important at the end of the game that you have to understand. If you can put your opponent in Zugzwang where they have to make a move, even though they don't really want to, that is the key. That is the key to how you can sometimes win these king and pawn endings. Because by me playing this simple little move h3, now, black's king, which remember, we're in opposition here. He's got to move. Now he's got to choose which way to go, and he's going to let my king invade. Okay? That's what's so critical. If you could force your opponent's king into Zugzwang. All right? So he decides to go this way, and I come in. He goes over. I come in, and I have a very clear plan, right? I'm going to come here, gobble these up, get a queen. His king is too far to stop me, right? Easy win, right? Easy win. Look what happens. He plays a5. Now, what should I do? What should I do? Well, if you had a chance to look at that, there's a couple of ways you could play this, but the 2 main ones would be you defend your pawn, which is what I played in the game, or you take the pawn, right? Either you take or you defend. What's the difference? Well, in my mind, I was thinking, you know what? I'll just defend because my pawn is kind of boxing him out. I like the idea of this, right? But it's actually not the greatest approach, and here's why. In this position, if black were to try to come around, this is what I had originally calculated. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's going to take him like 10 moves to get a queen. It's only going to take me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 moves. Cool. I'm going to win that race. But when he plays the move a5, and I play the move a3, and he takes and I take, guess what? Now it's easier for him to get a queen because he didn't have to take that extra pawn. So he goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He saves a move. And watch what happens if I go for this race. Watch this. It's black's turn, sorry. Here, takes, here, takes, here, and here. Now, this is probably still a win, but this is not going to be an easy win at all because he's got the queen. He's going to start checking me forever and forever and forever, and I have to figure out how to push this pawn down without getting checked, and it's going to be a very difficult game, especially when I only had like 30 seconds on the clock. Okay, that's not what you want to do. Now, there's a couple of interesting things here, and this is why king and pawn endings are so tricky, because I want to show you what Stockfish said about this, and then I want to show you what was actually played in the game. So I know we're kind of looking at a lot here, but this is really to illustrate the point here that you have to be extremely careful with these king and pawn endings. Okay, so but going back here, after capturing the pawn, he takes my pawn. I just assumed when I was calculating this that, well, you have to push the pawn down, right? I mean, isn't that what you would think? But Stockfish says, no, you don't have to do that. You can actually play the move king to f4. And what you're doing is making way for this. And why would you want to do that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, let's just say the king moves here. Now, when you play g5, look what's going to happen. Check. Aha. Isn't that interesting? So you're giving yourself the other option. Now, let's say the king was trying to avoid that, and so he moved here. Now what am I going to do? G5, B4. What can I play? A chance to look at that. The move is king to E3. And I'm actually saying, look, if you're going to just go for the pawn, I'm going to actually stop it. I'm going to force you to use your king to support it. And guess what? You just walked into this. Do you see how tricky this is? Like, do you see how much is going on in a position that you could very easily calculate? Okay, there's nothing else to think about. I pushed my pawn. He pushed his pawn. No. There's all kinds of clever little tricks here that Stockfish showed me. I didn't think about any of this during the game. I had 30 seconds on the clock. There's no way. But I'm showing you guys, these king and pawn endings are so tricky. And so because of this, this is how you actually win. I think there's another line here too. If the king decides to move this way, G5, yes, this was another one that was cool. I'll show you guys. If the king moved on this file, I can't even talk, on this file, now you can go check, forces it to go here where you can force the queen trade. And now this is a very easy win because your pawn is not going to be able to get caught. Very different than from when black had the queen, he could keep checking you. So Stockfish is so clever, okay? And hopefully you can understand how tricky that position was. Now, I didn't see all that during the game. So going back to the game, when he played A5, oh, and by the way, we didn't even talk about this line. I could have just captured here, and then I guess we get some, I don't even know what happens in this position. I guess it's something similar. Let's see. What's the deal now? Oh, same thing. Same thing. If I push this pawn, guess what? I'm not going to win. Look at this. This is incredible to me. Look at this. He gets the queen first, and I have to deal with checks forever, and the game is a draw. But if I remember that I don't have to push this pawn, I can just move my king and use this one. Look at this. We've seen this before. The check. There it is again. The check. And now, when he moves, bam, I can trade and I win. Aha. So super interesting stuff, right? Okay. Now, that wasn't even what happened in the game. That was just like what could have happened in the game. All right, let's go back. So when he played A5, I didn't take it. I did play A3. Takes. But when he went here, I decided to not go for that line because I didn't see that trick of like moving my king and using this pawn. I was thinking about this one. So what I did instead was king to E6. I said, you know what? I don't even have to let him come around and take my pawn. I can just come over here. And this brings us back to the critical principle in king and pawn endings. If you can force Zugzwang on your opponent, remember, that's when he has to move even though he doesn't want to, you can win. And this is a perfect example of how that works out in practice. Okay, perfect example. Because he's going to move over, I'm going to move up. And what is different? What is different about our pawns? This is what you need to understand. Just think about that for a second. What's different about our pawns? If you had a chance to look at that, my pawn is helping control squares that his king would like to move to. His pawn is not. His pawn is controlling these squares that I don't care about. My king doesn't care about those squares. But his king cares about these. And because of that, I can go here and attack him. And look at this. King to C6. I'm still attacking the pawn. And notice, this guy is helping. He's not able to go there and defend his pawn. Do you guys see how that works? This is Zugzwang, where black's position right now is totally fine. If black could just pass, they would be okay. But they can't. They either have to push this and allow me to take it for free and get a queen, or they have to move their king away. It's Zugzwang, and I win the pawn. And so that's how I ended up winning, right? And now it's pretty easy. I can just sacrifice this, run my king over, and win. So this is the key idea. Forcing Zugzwang in a position like this. And usually in these king and pawn endings, it happens when your pawn is actually controlling some squares that your opponent's king would like to go to. The fact that my king is kind of infiltrated into black's position and black's king is not is why I'm able to win. Imagine if my king was like down here and black's king was, here. He's probably going to be able to win in a similar fashion, right? If I come here, he's going to sneak his king in and do the same thing to me because his pawn would be controlling squares that my king wanted to go to, okay? So that's the critical idea, guys. Look for Zugzwang in these king and pawn endings and never forget how tricky they could be, right? You go back to this position right here. A5, super, super tricky, right? Initially, I was calculating he's going to come around and try to hunt my pawns. Wait a second, he's offering a pawn trade that doesn't change anything, right? No, it changes everything. And you have to be extremely careful on how you choose to play from here. Okay? And I think there's even another line that we didn't even talk about. Instead of playing a3 or taking and doing those other things, I could immediately go for this, allow him to take me, and apparently this is also winning, I guess for the same kind of idea. Yeah, same kind of reason. I just go here, and this is also interesting. Oh, yeah, because now he's got an extra pawn, but it's still a win. Wow. Okay, so there's another one. Like, it just goes to show these king and pawn endings are super, super tricky. And while we're talking about super tricky endings, going all the way back here, if black didn't play g5 and really put himself into Zugzwang by allowing me b4, the game should have been a draw. He could have played a5 to keep the pawns where they can move forward and not get stuck. That was kind of the key, right? He could have played g6, again, keeping the pawns where they're not stuck, where he has options to move different ones. But by playing g5, and after b4, he has no more options. Do you guys see why that was a losing move? He gave himself no options, or they gave themselves no options. So, crazy game, crazy position, super instructive, I think, for king and pawn endings. Like, if you have not studied any king and pawn endings, man, this video, just watch it a couple times. This stuff is super, super important. So, hope you guys can appreciate that. And, yeah, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.